Okay. Good evening, everybody. It is the 13th of January at 6 o'clock, and this is a meeting of the Regeneration, Vibrancy and Climate Change Scrutiny Review Board. But we'll move straight to the agenda. Any apologies? I've got Councillor Sandy.
No, Chair.
Late items introduced by the Chair. There are none. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No interest at all? Martin, you're interested?
As a member of the MCA Investment Committee.
Thank you very much. Noted.
Very necessary, but
similar. Yes,
You're
I
same
am
as well.
also.
so we're to blame when we start looking into it.
Okay, the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of October. Just get them up. Oh, you've got that. Yeah. I've got that. So can we agree that they're a true and accurate record? Yes, we're all happy with that. Okay, moving swiftly on then. Item 5, the MCA investment regeneration. Turning now to the main items on the agenda. Today we're talking about a themed approach to our meetings, looking at the effects of the recently established East Midlands Combined County Authority, or MCA, two major parts of the remit of the board: regeneration and transport. Our role today is to look at MCA, specifically with its implications for Derby. This involves considering the effects of its establishment in our local context and asking what we as a council can do to navigate the risks and opportunities MCA presents. We should be mindful, however, that MCA has its own scrutiny arrangements, so our focus should not stray into general scrutiny of MCA decisions. Our first item on the regeneration, Tammy and Catherine, please can you introduce the report?
Yeah, we can do. What we thought we would do as part of this meeting is give you a general overview of MCA and the way it operates, and then we can get into the detail of the two reports that you've got in front of you around regeneration and transport. I'm proposing to share those slides,
Yes.
just because it just helps us work through the process. So the combined authority has been established and is very much around how we can work better together as a region. So in the context of the discussion that we have today, it's important to understand that MCA takes decisions about benefit for the region. It's very much about how Derby can benefit regional delivery, regional development, regional growth. But equally within that, Derby has a really strong role to play as one of the key cities. So that's some of the discussion that we'll get into. So if we move on to the next slide, we thought it'd be helpful to just touch on governance arrangements. So there are two main decision-making elements within MCA. One is the board and the mayor, who makes the decisions, but also the investment committee, which both Councillor Ross and Councillor Bonser sit on. So those are the two with decisions around funding, if you like. There are then a series of advisory boards and regulatory committees that then advise both the mayor and the board and the investment committee on the decisions that they take. So there is an advisory board for business, which deals primarily with economic development and business development matters, as well as skills. A board around innovation. There is a committee for skills and employment, and a committee for transport and digital connectivity. And then there are two regulatory committees around adult governance, overview and scrutiny. And there's actually a further board now that's been recently established around land and housing, which is an advisory board, but that's only relatively recent. And those advisory boards, as I say, take papers and they...
Sorry, what did you say the name of the housing?
Land and Housing.
London Housing.
Land and Housing Committee, yeah. And Derby City Council has councillors on all of those boards, and there, we can run through those. So we have a direct input into the decision making at MCA and the advice that's given to the advisory boards.
And I suppose it's important to say that those committee members and colleagues here will say, well, you are a regional representative of that. You come from your authority, absolutely, but you are making decisions about the region, and therefore you're taking a regional perspective.
Okay, so we thought it would just be useful then to touch on the next slide. The
slide, the one you before. So, does the mayor have the final decision-making authority? You said there are two board and mayor, but who has the final decision-making authority?
So there are various different layers and delegations. So the mayor takes some decisions, the board takes some decisions, and the investment committee will take some decisions. And sometimes the investment committee will recommend a decision through to the board. So it depends on the level of and the nature of the funding involved. In terms of the strategic context, then it's quite a complex scenario, and it's fair to say that in its first year of operation, there's been a lot of work done on developing strategies and plans and priorities for investment across the combined authority. But overall, the kind of overarching strategic context, if you like, is the inclusive growth framework and outcomes framework, which was developed from a piece of work that concluded last September, I think, around the Inclusive Growth Commission. So an independent commission was set up to look at the priorities and what East Midlands could do to transform and be a major player on the national scene. So then beneath that are a number of strategies and plans that get into the operational delivery. So a local growth plan sets out the priorities, particularly around economic development, skills, and the barriers to growth. So influences quite a lot of the regeneration activity, housing growth activity, business and economic development activity. There is also then a spatial vision which overlaps with that growth plan, and that sets out the geography of where that will happen. This detail is all provided on EMCA's website, but there is essentially 5 spatial priorities, one of which is the Trent Arc, which covers the area between Derby City and Nottingham City, and is a major priority for investment and growth for the combined authority. There's then a local transport strategy and the Get Britain Working Plan and various other skills plans that sit beneath that. And then beneath that, you've got kind of an execution approach, how we're actually going to deliver the work. And so you'll start to see things in there like the East Midlands Investment Zone Strategy and Implementation Plan that sets out where some of those programmes of activity and programmes of work and how they will be delivered and what they will be delivered against. And that's overseen by a governance framework around investment and the single assurance framework, which is kind of their due diligence process for assessing all the investments that are made through MCA.
I suppose it's important to say that we've been working through this strategic context across the year. You know, these plans have been in different stages of development and still are. So one of the things in the on 4.9 in your transport document is the Mayor's big transport conversation and the Mayor's transport plan. So you'll hopefully all have seen that. That's out for consultation at the start of that transport plan at the moment. And as that emerges over the course of the year, when they've had their public consultations, etc., then that will form a much more concrete strategic framework against which all the investment decisions that relate to transport will be made. So we have indicative framework from the emerging plan, but obviously that'll all firm up as because EMCA is still very new.
And I think it's fair to say, you know, it has been very much about setting up a new organisation. So it's taken some time to get going. Setting up a new organisation from scratch is never easy, and will take time to identify what those strategies and priorities are. I think we're starting to see more of a rhythm now, aren't we? And we're getting into more of a flow about how the meetings, committees will work, how decision making happens, what funding is available, and how that will be used regionally to deliver some of the priorities that EMCA have set out, and equally what we as a city can contribute to the regional picture. Yep, I think so. So we thought it'd be useful now to run through, as I say, some of the funding that's come through to Derby in both regeneration and transport areas, and then move on to kind of how funding will work in the future, because it is quite different to what you might have experienced in the past with funding mechanisms. So in the regeneration space, very much the vision, as I've said, is around growing the economy, about giving people the chance to benefit from that growth through skills. That's what the inclusive growth is about, and about unlocking those barriers. So whether that's transport, housing, skills, access, the focus is very much on those areas. The funding that MCA has available is essentially agreed through a devolution deal, and then a number of streams of funding that are coming down from government are now channeled through the combined authority. So where in the past some of that money we would have bid for as an authority, that money now comes direct to East Midlands Combined Authority and they distribute it against their priorities. So for example, things that their capital funding includes things like Brownfield Housing Fund, an investment fund. It includes UK SPF, so Shared Prosperity Funding, which used to come direct to the City Council, now goes through to MCA, and various other bits of capital funding. We've also got things like the East Midlands Investment Zone, which was an award made direct to MCA, which includes capital and revenue funding, and various other bits of money, really. So it is very much a different approach to what we've seen within Derby City Council in the past. And Derby has to be able to, in order to benefit from that money, has to be able to demonstrate its alignment with MCA's priorities and its the inclusive growth framework and the local growth plan and its strategic priorities, but also deliverability and value for money. So our kind of funding and investment is very much assessed on a regional level against other.
Is it okay if we can ask questions?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you said the brownfields, for example, brownfields fund, right? So that MCA has it. So Derby will bid for the money they would want to have out of it, or how's it going to work?
No, so it's very much that the MCA will set out. The Brownfield Housing Fund is probably not the best choice because it's a very restricted programme with it's a legacy fund essentially that MCA have picked up. But they will set out a series of priorities and they will commission pieces of work that say these are the areas where we think we need to look at investing. And there's a bit of a change. So in the past they would have invited expressions of interest, but they would go to everybody. So the City Council might have put forward some of its schemes, but particularly for Brownfield Housing Fund, they were private sector developer led. And some might have been, they'd actually say we need to invest in these kind of things in this area. So they will move to much more of a commissioning approach than a bidding approach. So they will say we need activity in this area. If you look at some, we'll come on to this in a little while, but if you look at some areas, they will say we think the region needs this and this is how we want to deliver that. Decide. And they will decide. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question about the funding? You said there was some funding what used to come to Derby City Council, which now goes to MCA. What kind of figures are you looking at?
The shared prosperity funding, I think, I don't think we've got the numbers up on it.
I think the previous programme that Derby City Council managed directly was in the region of, and this won't be wholly accurate, but it was in the region of 6 million, I think, over a 3-year period. MCA have had 3 million direct to them of shared prosperity funding. So that particular pot used to come to all local authorities across England. That changed at the end of last financial year, and instead of coming to local authorities, that funding went straight to MCA. And in fact, MCA have then passported some through to the City Council and to other organisations like Marketing Derby. But it isn't just an example of how the combined authorities are increasingly used as a channel for government investment, as opposed to, you know, when we bid for Future High Street Fund programme, for example, 5-6 years ago, any local authority from across the country could put a bid in to that central government part that covered the whole of the country, and that's obviously that's the change that we're seeing now for us in Derby.
I think it's fair to say as well that some of the benefits of that is that we get a much more stronger regional picture. So some of the things that we would have had to fund in Derby itself, we no longer have to directly fund that as a city council, because there is a better system for delivering some of those things. So for example, inward investment, business support are classics where actually there is a mix of regional scale delivery which will benefit our businesses and local delivery delivered here in Derby. So you get a mix of the two approaches, which is a much stronger thing than we've had in the past, where it was a bit more of a postcode lottery where you might have had something in Derby, or you might not have had something in Derby, but another authority would have had access to that. So a business on the border wouldn't have known, wouldn't have had the same access.
the bonds.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, it's sort of all starting to come together now, isn't it, really, at EMCA? But there's a feeling that rather than lots of authorities all doing their own thing, that there is a theme behind what's happening. So it is just feel more strategic. That, you know, I think that's the idea, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's from how long it's been set up, we're actually doing quite well, because it must be a very
It
complex
feels
beast.
very
Yeah,
frustrating
and,
to start up, but there was a lot of work
I
around
can imagine so.
governance and so on.
Councillor Pandy?
So just to put this in perspective, for example, Hippodrome, brownfield site, and even the ownership isn't very certain. So council is trying to get the ownership, if I'm not wrong. So if council gets the ownership and council wants to develop, then they can put their hands into this funding pot.
Not necessarily, no, because it's very much about what are the priorities of EMCA. We'll come on to how we develop future projects, but it's not a simple chance of us bidding into a pot. It's not working right.
Which is why those strategic plans are so important, because they set the strategic framework on which EMCA will make those decisions about investment.
Holmes?
Very different.
Yeah, probably one for Catherine, actually. It's been recently in the press, and also it's on the papers, 4.7, about funding received by Derby since 2025. So starting with the marketplace, so 3.5 million. Apologies if it's been out there explained fully, but just for this board, is that specifically for demolition of the assembly rooms? Because it's not quite clear what site preparation works means. Where does that fit?
Yeah. Do you, we were going to do a bit of a tag team anyway, and it was my job next to go through the table.
Okay, sorry.
Let's do that. So what
It's okay. So yeah.
we'll do this. So save your questions now until we've finished
Absolutely.
this.
Sorry,
Because it's in a bit. So, okay, shall we just carry on?
Okay, so we'll run through the funding that we've received and how that works as well, because some of that is not fully approved yet, but they're kind of earmarked schemes. So I'll hand over to Catherine.
Oh, there we go. That was it.
That was it. Yeah, we were on there.
So, yeah, as you said, Councillor Holmes, 4.7 is a list of all of the decisions that either have already been taken and funding awarded, or are in the process of being considered and taken to a board in the near future. And I suppose this is a bit of a case in point, because all of these projects have come forward in parallel. Firstly, with EMCA being established, with their governance processes being set up, with their staffing all being brought in, and with the strategies being written that we referenced earlier. And we've bid for a lot of these projects. So there's been a call for proposals, and we've put forward proposals. So I suppose it's important just to start with that context. And the other thing about this table, it just shows the range of funds that are at EMCA's disposal, because some of these have been funded with their investment fund, some of them are paid for with shared prosperity funds, some of them are paid for by brownfield. So it's quite a complicated picture. And the whole point about where we are hopefully collectively moving to is you won't see that same approach in the future. It will very much be around strategic programmes of activity with chunks of funding, with EMCA working behind the scenes to work out where that comes from and how it's allocated. So that's the context. So just running down the list, and these are kind of in date order. So the first two projects were approved, if you like, kind of last financial year, early 2025. The first one is the city centre project, mainly around the station quarter, because that's one of the early projects that we want to bring forward. And I suppose the important thing about this, the project that you mentioned, Councillor Holmes, the Marketplace and Beckettwell, is one of the criteria that EMCA's had across all of their calls for proposals so far is they want to get enabling works. So what are the early things that EMCA can help us do that de-risk sites and makes development in the long term easier to bring forward? So they're not about the delivery of the ultimate building or the ultimate jobs or the ultimate inward investment, but they're about that early stage work that we can de-risk development on site. So there's a number of projects in that category, if you like. So the first one is around city centre, mainly the station quarter. The second one is out at Infinity Park, because members may recall a few years ago we established a building that the council forward funded and still owns for the Nuclear Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. that was a University of Sheffield owned organisation that has since folded, and we've now reassigned that lease to the University of Derby. So we have an ongoing use for the building, and it's still in the same kind of category of research and development, advanced manufacturing, all of those things. And EMCA awarded some funding to repurpose that space to suit the requirements of the University of Derby and how they were going to use the building. So that was the second project. The third is shared prosperity that we've already referenced, and there's a whole programme there that I won't go into, but it's around the same themes and the same programme areas that have existed previously in Derby when we ran the programme ourselves. So communities and place, employment and skills, and business support. So those three. And as Tammy referenced earlier, inward investment historically in Derby, we've directly funded Marketing Derby along with bondholders from across their membership base, private sector, to support inward investment. EMCA have carried that activity on in an interim transition year, but they're looking regionally about how we can work more collectively on inward investment at a regional level while still maintaining the benefits of that local provision and the local knowledge and the local expertise that organisations like Marketing Derby have. So that's a kind of transitional arrangement for this year. And then the bottom few are the next set of projects are ones that are still in train, if you like, so they haven't got final approval, but they're in process of being considered. So we all know Beckett well. This is specifically about Duckwood Square. So works on site. You'll know the site. There's work we need to do to make it development ready and retaining walls and existing structures, etc. Marketplace, as you referenced, Councillor Holmes, that is around early stage preparation works, including demolition and other things to get the site ready for development. But as we've discussed previously, and I think it was when the request to Cabinet came through around progressing this funding ask, what that doesn't do clearly is address the longer term use of that site, which will all be subject to, firstly, planning application submission and consideration, and secondly, a Cabinet decision in due course in the next few months to look at the specific development proposals for the site. This is purely about enabling works to help address some of those viability challenges that we know exist on the site. So that's that one. The next two aren't actually City Council bids, so the money won't come through the City Council, they're by third parties, but obviously we've referenced them because they do align to our priorities and they're happening in the city. So there's nothing really I can say about the private sector development one because that's all purely confidential. That's a third party bid. The next one, the bid came from Compendium, who are our development partner, so we're aware of that, and that's to help bring forward the right quality scheme in as quick a time as possible for the final phase of Castle Ward, which obviously we welcome. And then the final one, South Derby Growth Zone. Again, this is coming through the County Council because they're leading on this project, but it's really important for us because this will deliver the infrastructure and the road to unlock all of the housing and commercial land within that South Derby Growth Zone, which is really critical for the city. And then the last one isn't so much a funding ask, but there's a whole piece of work happening at the moment to look at how we, again, similar to inward investment, how we look at regional support, business support at a regional level to make sure there's consistency, there's equity, that businesses get a clear and comparable offer, whether they're in Swadlincote or Mansfield or wherever they are in EMCA, whilst also allowing certain local decisions to be taken about what's specifically needed for our area. So there'll be general business support at a regional level, but there may well be other specific projects that focus on the particular needs of, for example, rural businesses versus urban businesses, that kind of difference. So so that's just a quick whiz through the funding we've had to date. So I'll just pause there in case there's any.
Well, carry on until we get to the end and then we'll do questions.
Well, I'll do the
Shorter now,
transport,
isn't it? Yeah.
which is hopefully fairly straightforward because you've actually all seen this already. So we know that EMCA is different because EMCA becomes the transport authority for the region. So we retain our highways authority powers, but EMCA becomes the transport authority. We know at the end of this month, they take on responsibility for passenger transport, for instance. So there are a number of things like transport planning that have passed from us to at that regional level. So we knew quite a way out that there was probably going to be some funding that came with this because that's what the other combined authorities across the country have. And so we've been working to focus on an investment pipeline. I think that is the key difference in all of this, that we suddenly have a surety of funding for a number of years. So what EMCA want to develop is this regional pipeline, so we know what we are going to be doing over the next 3 years, 5 years, ultimately 7 years in transport. And that will be based around those national policy and goals, the EMCA local growth plan as the key driver for everything that EMCA does, as well as that mayoral transport plan. And then they'll be looking at things like deliverability, stakeholder engagement, value for money, all the things that we would expect our projects and programmes to have. So it was way back in March last year that EMCA board approved the first set of transport funding as we knew it. And we then took our cabinet report in April last year because we got just over £15 million worth of funding through EMCA for transport and highways priorities. And that's set out in the table in your report. And I guess the important thing to talk about, as Catherine and Tammy have mentioned, there are things that we used to get directly that now EMCA get. So the Department for Transport used to give us highways maintenance block, integrated transport block, bus service improvement, active travel fund. That would have come directly to us. That now goes through EMCA. So they can take that holistic view of that transport pot and as they start to develop and as the mayoral transport plan emerges. So when we had that funding, so we got, as it tables, we got for maintenance, for integrated transport, for those normal things that we would have got from the Department for Transport. EMCA took a view that they would passport that to us using the same Department for Transport formula that has previously been used. So at the moment, that hasn't changed significantly. It is what we would have expected to have got previously. The big prize, if you like, was something that was then called, I'm going to get this wrong, City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement 2, and has now become the Transport City Regions pot. So that is the new funding that comes along with a combined authority. So we set out a series of projects, again working with EMCA on them, and again it went through to Cabinet in April, and those are around continuing to work out a scheme development feasibility for Derby Abbey Mills Bridge. We want to look at the inner ring road. We know that that's a key area for growth. So we want to investigate what would happen if we make changes and improvements to the inner ring road and how we might make that permeable in some key areas, such as around to release housing growth on Derby Riverside. We looked at active travel interventions. We know that's a key area for EMCA. The mayor has appointed an active travel ambassador, so stating that's a key aim, and looking at active travel schemes that connect different parts of the city. The A52 Spondon interchange around by Asda roundabout, that's another key area that's building on the work that we did under the Transforming Cities Fund through Derby and Nottingham Road. Continuing asset management. So one of the key things that we all know we're trying to deal with is the declining asset that we have, not just in highways, but across drainage, across our culverts, etc., and some of our structures. So funding to look at that, and then as well as additional preventative maintenance and funding to support that pipeline development. We also got, and this is something we're now seeing certainly from a transport point of view, and I think increasingly we will through things like Trent Arc, EMCA saying this is our regional priority. So this is our project, but we might ask you to deliver it on our behalf, or we'll work with you. And the Merrill Way, we got £3 million for the Merrill Way project junction, and that is a regional project, but we are delivering on their behalf because it happens to be in our patch. So I think that's the key change that's happened along the way. We will obviously, that will become more and more clear as we get that transport plan. And I suppose the slight difference with transport is we already are starting to work on what we are going to get next year. So I will hand over to Nigel after Catherine's gone to talk about those priorities. But the Transport Committee is an advisory committee, so it will make recommendations to the board for decision. But what they have already decided is that over the next 3 years, there will be a minimal pot for 3 themes. That is asset resilience, so highways maintenance, neighbourhoods and communities, so the work that you all see the benefit of on the street, as it were, and integrated public transport. So they've agreed a minimum settlement across each of the 3 years for that. So that's just an important thing, and we will be looking at that through with the Transport and Digital Committee over the next few months. But I will pause there and go back to you, Catherine, for future.
No, we'll
Shall we
do,
stop
yeah.
the questions there? Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Holmes is first.
Thank you. So if I've got two, Chair. So the first one is on the regeneration side of things. So enabling works then for marketplace as an example, and given we're some way off, well, in my view, we're some way off, removal of condition 3, which allows demolition. And that, as it stands at the moment, requires pretty much an oven ready scheme, contractually funded, etc., which is a fairly big ask, but obviously will be achieved eventually. How long is the funding available for? So obviously, assuming we're successful as a council to get that funding for those enabling works, you know, is it explained to EMCA that the expected time frame is this, and therefore also we have this complication with condition 3 that needs to be removed before it can be spent? So where does that all fit with that one? That's my first question.
Okay, do you want me to?
Shall we answer that one?
Yeah.
So in order to secure that funding, we have to put a business case forward to EMCA that explains how we're going to spend the money, when we're going to spend it, and what the dependencies are that will allow us to spend it. So we are having to explain that story, as you've just alluded to, Matt, that says in order to start demolition, we need to do this sequence of things. And we've been clear about that in our submission to EMCA, and we have to obviously assess within all of that the risks and issues that come with that. So that's all part of the bid. And then when the funding agreement, assuming we are awarded the funding and there's a funding agreement in place, we would set out within the information we share with EMCA what the timescale is that we believe we can spend that money within, and that will form part of the funding agreement. So it's mainly on financial years. That's the main thing they're worried about, rather than exactly what date things are going to be spent on. But within this, for example, within 26, 27, 28, 27, 28, I haven't got the detail in front of me on that particular profile that we've sent, but we'll have to share that with EMCA, and that will form part of the funding agreement that they then monitor us against. So we'll have a series of milestones in the funding agreement that says these things need to happen for us to deliver the project, and then we'll have a spend profile in the funding agreement that says, and this is when we're going to spend the funding.
And I think it's probably important to emphasise that with all of these projects, the process can take quite a long time at MCA, because we've got a number of gateways to go through, and the grant funding agreements can take 6-8 months to get out. So the approach that's been taken is to try and twin track some of the delivery alongside some of the kind of application delivery assessment process. So very much, you know, a lot of the projects that are on this existing funding are very much about preparation works for bigger projects. So the approach is very much around making sure that we explain the story from start to end, and not just that specific project in train. So for things like Beckett-Well, for example, we're explaining what the longer term solution is, even if that's not nailed on at this point in time. So it is very much an evolving picture, I think it's fair to say, but the level of detail that goes into a business case goes into all the detail that you've described, and we will come through to Cabinet for decisions at the appropriate point.
So just one follow-up on that then. It's not, there is a finite assumption of timeframes then from this funding, so it'd probably be useful to know, as an example, the marketplace.
Yeah.
If it's agreed from MCA, what is their expectation of that funding still being live for Derby City Council to use it? You know, it's just, I'm just a little bit confused as to how long that is going to be available for, given that there's some uncertainty for that particular project, and all the things that get put into place, the business plans and everything else. It's key, isn't it? It can't be taken back out, otherwise that causes a real problem. So just trying to work out that time frame.
And I think what I would say is it is slightly different, and it depends which pot they're using. But MCA has a devolution deal that is limitless. So there isn't, it's not like a future high streets funding bid where it has to be spent by March 26,
Maybe
for example.
Confidence building if there's slight delays or.
But we are setting out in the business case what we think the end date is, not MCA telling us what we think the end date is. So it's a slightly different relationship.
I mean, many of us have been in similar meetings, but some of us aren't going to be involved directly in the MCA process. So it is sometimes, it's a little bit difficult to understand the process sometimes without actually not being directly involved in those meetings. Chair, if I may, just one more question.
Well, I was going to say, can I go on to the
Yes,
others and then come
Yeah,
back to you?
absolutely. No, sorry.
That's great. So Councillor Bonza.
Thank you. Yeah, just switching to the transport projects and the figures that were provided. You mentioned that the highways maintenance block has been allocated based on the previous formula. Is there a sense that that's going to be the way it's going to be divvied up, if you like, in years to come? Or do you think that was just an approach that was taken at this point because they had to do something, I guess, and allocate something?
Just a continuity approach. They were late in the day at receiving that particular funding from DFT last year. Getting that funding up. And I suppose it meant that nobody lost out and
Right.
nobody's expectation was changed. I do think there's scope to change that in future years. If anything, I mean, last year we had a little bit of a bonus on top. So previously spending £4 million on highway maintenance, and some of that was made up from council unsecured borrowing. Bonus of MCA last year was the council didn't need any unsecured borrowing for that, and didn't need the cost of it because MCA's top up covered it. Verna mentioned about, they've already taken a decision to settle on some minimum figures. Now those figures are, yes, going to increase as we go through the settlement rounds. It's quite clear though that in the funding agreement to from DFT to MCA that nothing is necessarily ring-fenced. So things could change over subsequent years, whether that's demand-led or whether it's based on delivery performance. And I suppose there's always going to be a balance between the regional strategy and, for want of a better description, local maintenance.
I guess it's worth saying because if you are interested and you want to go and look at the Transport Committee papers, because the Transport Committee is this week, so the papers are out, and that committee will be asked to consider an uplift in maintenance funding this time, which is considerable.
But based on the same book.
Based on the same split
Yes.
across the authorities.
Same apportionment, but the
Yeah.
figures rise.
I guess that's all up for negotiation come LGR as well.
That depends on, it throws us into the world of how much
Yes.
additional asset there is, and how that's divided, and subsequently how the funding scope is divided as well.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned, you mentioned about active travel, right? And we had this conversation before as well when council introduced in part with the Lime bikes and everything. Derby isn't ready, right? So when you mention active travel, what exactly you mean by active travel? That's the first question. And based on that, further to that one is the EV charges, the way we showed, the urgency putting EV charges all across the city and all across the country. And I don't know if you're aware or not, majority of those EV chargers have lost their cables now. Those cables have been stolen. So when you say active travel, is it still going to be focusing on putting out more EV chargers across the city?
Well, I suppose, and I'll let Nigel do the detail, but active travel doesn't require an EV charge. I guess I would say that for a start, and you'll see, I think we've demonstrated through the scheme we've put in Victoria and Albert Street, where we've got a fully compliant separated active travel lane, cycle lane. So those are the sorts of things we are talking about and thinking about from how do we get across the city? How do we get to those key areas of growth or areas of housing on the boundary as part of a cycle route? When we originally talked about transforming cities, we had a real ambition to, what could be a cycle route between Nottingham and Derby, and that has regional benefit, which again is something that MCA will probably think about, I think, as far as their work is concerned. And I suppose the other thing, and again, it is benefiting from having that Transforming Cities fund that we had available and the future transport zones. One of the things we've been working with MCA on is a ride app, so a mobility as a service application, and we've launched that. So you can get on your phone an app. you can sign in, you can do journey planning, it will book you tickets for buses, etc., etc. So, you know, and EMCA will take that forward and think about it from a regional context. So these are the big advantages of working through a combined authority, and the things that can make a real difference for getting more people to be more active, which I think is what we basically want, just people to move more. Walking is as much an important part as active travel as cycling, and I feel like I always have to say that you know, making sure we've got great walking routes and cycle routes is really important.
It's probably people understand that.
No, I think you're right. They just see cycling.
Well, they don't realise the social inclusion that comes along with that, actually seeing somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, and that, I think we all get out, we all see lots of people, but there's a lot of people that don't.
Yeah.
They sit in the house day in, day out, and that doesn't do anybody any good.
No.
You know, so I think that's really important.
Walking is probably the most important.
Of course it is. You go out and you see somebody, you might speak to somebody, you've not spoke to somebody for weeks at a time.
But it's not just about trip from A to B. It could be an interim trip between public transport, for example.
Correct.
And it's much more important to, you're absolutely right, as a community, much more. You know, one of the things that we've tried to work into our award plans and other programs is this idea of movement net gain, just trying to get communities more active. On the EV charging point, I mean, we had a grant to put EV chargers in places, like lots of other places in the country. We only stimulate the market. We don't own any of those. They're not ours. They belong to be people's. They are their asset. It's for them to maintain them. There are some difficulties in that particular network at the moment, commercial issues. The market is shifting. The cross-channel gully programme that's about to be announced by government will again change some of that local level market. So it's in an interesting state of flux, EV charge points. Are we going to put any more out? Probably not in the immediate term, but I think the whole issue of EV will again become a regional scheme because it makes more sense. It already is a regional scheme. You know, the scheme that we have here runs under a D2N2 contract, which covers the EMCA area. That contract is going to be renewed in the not too distant future. I think maximum it's got these 2 years left. Meantime, I think there will be definitely a regional emphasis on what does EV mean for this region, how much is going to be invested in it, and who's going to be the partners that are going to come on board.
Councillor Rawson now.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a comment really, and I think Derby's done very well in terms of funding that we've been awarded so far, and that's really down to having the capacity within the local authority in terms of regeneration team, economic development team, transport teams who understand the issues in the city and then have the ability to work up solutions and then present those to funders when the opportunity becomes available. And not all local authorities have had that capacity in the past, and that's put us in a good position when funding comes along and EMCA's looking for schemes that are ready to be delivered. So I think that's worth saying. It's what we've managed to achieve isn't necessarily the same for all local authorities. And the pipeline, as they call it, becomes ever more important because that's how the funding is going to work in the future. So it's really important that we continue to keep that capacity within the local authority to be able to do the hard work behind the scenes, work the projects up, and then be able to present them in a professional way that EMCA know is going to deliver. So I think that's worth putting on record, really, the acknowledgement of the works that officers and at a political level actually over a period of time that have understood the importance of that and stuck with it.
Councillor Holmes.
Thanks, Chair. So on to transport then on, I think 4.11. At exec scrutiny last night, we were talking about EMCA, and I made the comment more or less that it's my, you know, EMCA is a big picture. It's a regional framework. It's far bigger than Derby City itself in terms of transport delivery. And of course, we've got the mayor that ultimately decides kind of the direction of travel, no pun intended. But councillors across Derby, and Nigel will know what I'm going to say, councillors across Derby haven't had the ability to deliver low-level schemes, small interventions in their wards. We used to call them local transport priorities. Now we have, yeah, well, you know, you used to be able to nominate schemes, and everyone's got lots of lists, so they can't deliver it. We've now obviously done the work with the regional, more regional extraction, not regional, area strategic plans, and try to pull it all together, which is a positive step forward. But is the 2.8 million that's suggested for or noted for community and neighbourhoods? Had a conversation with a cabinet member after the meeting at exec, and they were suggesting that there might be an emerging community funding part of some kind, and I'm wondering if that is that. Is it one in the same? And there was also a suggestion that may facilitate boards and local councillors to start to maybe, via officers, deliver some of these small interventions, which wouldn't fit within a much larger strategic plan or even the mayor's priorities in some cases. You know, very small things, line of sight, double yellows to improve road safety, very, you know, things that really matter to residents, and we've been waiting a long time to deliver them, and you'll know, Chair, that you've got a list. Is that an opportunity, or am I completely off track there? Is there a part, are we going to be able to see some kind of localised interventions that we can work with officers on in our wards to deliver for our communities?
So what you've got to do is go back to last year's capital programme report. It was changed by capital. It happens in wards. So basically, what would have been your priorities before now need to be the formation of your local. So if there's previous stuff that you want to pull together into a theme or whatever it is, then that's your opportunity to do that. Other things that are really small interventions that require no design, no consultation, etc., where they're just simple, yeah, we can do that. We just order that, we'll get it done. Those sorts of things will just be, you know, we'll try and do as many as we can to an annual cash value. We'll put a small pot of money together and we'll just do those small things as and when they come through the door. Things that people are going to say are about road safety, I think we as professionals need to make the judgment about whether they're actually road safety or not, because there's a perception and there's another factor in there. So basically, what you need to get done needs to be in your plan, or it needs to be really small, and we can just issue it. Or, you know, we'll look at them, and if they are genuinely road safety, we will do them outside of the plan, outside of those small works, because they need to be done, because we have a duty in terms of safe and functioning network. So,
with all due respect, though, I accept that it has to be officers' advice. We can't just, as councillors, decide that we want double yellows on a corner because we think it's needed through line of sight or some other similar issue like parking issues or whatever. We need to go to officers, and as you know, all of us have sat down with transport officers and literally gone a whole map of the ward. Everything we can think of is in there, whether it be a small intervention or a bit of more of a long-term plan or works. But you say that officers will try and deliver those small interventions, but they haven't been. They haven't been for a number of years. So I'm a little bit confused. Are you saying that we will be able to do that potentially via the EMCA framework, or is Derby City going to set up something that is similar to LTP priorities? Where are we with it?
There's no intention to set anything up that's similar to LTP priorities.
Right.
Other than your ward plans, which instead of you picking schemes on a year-on-year basis, some of which take more than a year to deliver and that sort of stuff, it's actually taking a look at your ward, saying, what do we want to do in the next 3 years? What's the theme here? What do we want to achieve? So what would have been priorities, you should now be forward planning those priorities. The small interventions, I will tell you, do not include extending the yellow lines, because that needs consultation. That is more, that either needs to be in your plan, or we need to be doing it because it is a critical safety issue and it's our duty to deliver it. That is not a small intervention.
So, sorry, Chair. So the issue I have here is I accept that, but if it is in the plan, dotted around, we genuinely believe there's a line of sight issue or a safety issue that would require some intervention. I just say double yellows because everyone understands it. But you decide as officers what that might be. The problem I have is that I can see the bigger picture about MCA over a number of years. Funding will come down for larger priorities. We've seen that with sustainable transport, bus improvements, bus stop improvements. We saw that gradually get delivered over 2 or 3 years, 4 years. We can't wait that long for some of these small interventions. If they're part of the plan, my fear is that they'll just get ignored, and it will be the bigger picture that maybe lots of wards are getting something in this direction, whether it be improving cycle routes and things like that, and we still won't be able to look at these small interventions. They'll get lost, they'll go through the cracks. We won't be able to deliver them because they just won't be part of a overall strategy, even though they're actually recorded in the ward issues.
So again, if you go back to what we put in the 2025 report, we tried to draw the link between the Mayor's plan or anticipated plan, the approach of MCA around placemaking, drawing a line to ward level placemaking. So what's in your ward plans should not get lost because it is part of the bulk strategy around placemaking. But it's your chance to do something at street by street level. It's also, from an MCA perspective, the Mayor's chance to show that MCA delivers something at a local level. So the ward plans are really important. Critical thing about having those plans and being able to show that there's a theme, and they're not just scattergun approaches, but there's a theme to them and a continuity to them, and a plan over a period of time that builds around placemaking, is that you can move outside of the traditional funding that's come forward. So if we look at what we're asking for next year, we've got to guarantee 1.9 million for integrated transport. Majority of that goes into the local plan delivery. You're also asking for that to be inflated by a further 3.2 million to accelerate the delivery of those plans and some of the bigger issues. That is money that you would not be able to access if we weren't making that local placemaking case. Placemaking is a common theme. Tammy will no doubt talk about this in a bit, that it runs right from the top right down. That's where the plans fit in. So if it's in your plan, it should not get subverted. What you have got the latitude, all of you within plans, is to choose which of those you think are going to make the biggest impact. What do you want to show people that you as councillors can do? Is it something big? Is it a range of small things? You know, what is going to be the most eye-catching thing that you can deliver? And we'll be guided amongst the plan with that. And we'll advise you in terms of consultation, delivery time, design, etc. But the idea is that we all have an interest in making those plans work and showing some impact, and MCA want to see that impact. That's the whole point behind this thing. So your concerns about if you've got a sequence of WO lines and the general.
Oh, sorry, not it. Define as an issue. It's whether you decide as officers professionally what the solution is. So we get hung up on saying WO lines, but
if you say there's safety around this junction, and we have
there's an issue. You decide what the solutions come back to.
Bollards are WO lines, that sort of stuff. But let's say it's WO lines, then we'll advise you on how long it would take, what the extent of them should be. And if that's a theme that you want to make, we're doing a widespread junction protection scheme, then we'll for once, because we've got a 3-year programme, we ought to wrap up a plethora of those into combined consultation across your wards. You can talk about that's what you're achieving this year. We can get them done. The problem is when we get this discontinuity between a bit of this here, a bit of that there, a bit of that there. Okay. And I know there's 18 plans, but we are gearing up to service those plans.
So, sorry, Chair, this is my last question. But it keys into something that you've said, which I totally agree with, and Werner, walking, active travel. again, I'll give an example in my ward, and you'll have them everywhere else. We have main walking routes that are in really poor condition, and we want the council to actually resurface those, to actually, not only just because it's a duty of care, and we all should expect decent pavements wherever we are because we pay our council tax and everything else, but also how are we going to promote, as Councillor Ingle says, the chair, walking if you've got trip hazards on your pavements, and some of them are in really poor condition. That is something I would like to see, Chair. Maybe not yet, because obviously we maybe need to wait for the municipal year to reset. But that, for me, is almost like a topic we could look at. How are we going to actually pull funding through to actually make those improvements, to improve the pavements, which has then a massive benefit on active travel. Yeah. Because it's a double whammy then. It really does tick the boxes for me.
Yeah.
I can think of some paths that we have in Chellaston and on the green of Maple Drive, and there is such poor state of play that it's shockingly bad. And if they were up to the standard as we've had the new path that went in at the side of the academy, which is fabulously well used, if that was again, you would get more people out and all this one. Anyway, we're on.
Could you just make one small point on that? Really very quickly, what MCA are seeking when they talk about maintenance, they're talking about going beyond pothole repair. They want to see enhanced maintenance. So we're looking at, part of those ward plans, where have we got maintenance funding that could go in to do those sorts of issues. So in addition, transport and active travel particularly does include paths in parks, which have traditionally got left behind, because lots of people crisscross their ward through parks and green spaces. So they will be in our sites as well. And if we get the maintenance uplift, then these are issues we need to be specifically.
Well, that's extremely positive to hear, isn't it? First of all,
my question was about so we've got big picture things, and it's more strategic planning. But again, I worry about the small things that might get left behind, but not in terms of, as maybe Councillor Holmes suggested, but the small details and the local knowledge that people have. So, for example, in 4.9, there's the Mayor's big transport conversation happening. And, it says residents, businesses, community groups are invited to talk about it. But to what extent are we actually going to them and asking? Because, for example, like for the Shaftesbury Petrie scheme that we did last year, I was amazed that actually there's so much local knowledge that residents, businesses, people have, that even as councillors we did not have, and as officers we didn't have. Are we actually going to them and asking them? Is it accessible? Are we really making sure that we're including all of that? Because there will be pockets everywhere. There'll be niche detail on street corners. People don't go this way because of that, and we as officers may not know that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The LTP consultation, we had some feedback. The reason why I flipped this page open is because I went to a meeting and I scribbled down some feedback. The MCA are running the LTP consultation, and they have done a series of launches, a series of workshops, and a series of what they've tagged as being community engagement. But quite good feedback. When they look at other combined authorities, the amount of returns they've had to their questionnaire is more than they would have expected at this stage. However, Derby responses have been quite poor. I'm just reporting what MCA officials said at the meeting. Responses from age group 19 to 24, very, very poor, very low. Responses from ethnic groups is very, very low. And the majority are, it's a roughly 60-40 female-male split, but the majority are coming from 55s or 60s and over. So we're trying at the moment to assist them. To be fair to them, they've recognised that and they've asked for assistance. So we're trying to work, particularly just in our department at the moment, where we've got community networks that go out through Owen Swift's service, through Robbie and others who work into communities, to try and see if we can identify networks that we can share with MCA so they can get into those communities. But I'll take your comments back, because I think you're absolutely right. There's this, they're trying to have a big transport conversation. Yes, some of it is mega strategic and it's numbers and stuff. But it's all designed to make a difference to people, which is why they've gone out on that consultation exercise at the moment, why they're seeking feedback. They're getting predominantly feedback from bus users, and it looks like, you know, be careful how I say this, but it looks like gold card users who are interested in having more frequency. That's the biggest part of the market that they seem to be getting. So there does need to be more people participating, and they need to find a way of gathering that information, but we need to help them, I think.
Could we take it through like a neighbourhoods route?
Absolutely.
Because neighbourhood
Absolutely.
managers probably have
Yeah.
the most contact.
Yeah, we're
and the
talking
most
to
networks.
neighbourhood managers at the moment, through Tim and Aidan particularly. But yeah, we're trying to pull the networks that we have to try, because it's just not broad enough, the responses at the moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Pandy.
My question is pretty simple. I remember attending one of the presentation from Simon Etkin, and he said, if I remember correctly, he said Derby needs around 40 million to maintain the roads and payments around the city. So how much of the funding are we getting this year? Because Councillor Rawson said that Derby has done really well in terms of the funding. What's the actual number?
So for highways maintenance specifically, so we would expect normally through the Department for Transport normal allocation and split to get around 4 million. I think it's just over. If Transport Committee this week support the increased option that's on the table, and then that would have to be ratified by board. So there's a process in could do that. We get twice that. So looking at about 8 million plus. Yeah. So it's a significant increase.
Can you just change that around? Because when we used to get direct funding, to get about 2.35 million would come through for highway maintenance, but out of that we also had to take some funding off for highway assets that weren't carriageway, footway. The drainage had to come out and stuff as well, so it was always diluted down, and that's why the council used to put unsecured borrowing in to top it up to a reasonable number. We need roughly about 6 million quid a year to stand still. That's a steady state. So last year we got just over 4 million dedicated directly for maintenance. And we actually did more maintenance because we did maintenance as part of schemes. So the whole of Nottingham and Derby roads were resurfaced. So that's several million extra just in those two streets. So there's things that there's maintenance as an activity annual, but then there are other things that contribute to it. We're just on Duffield Road, and a large part of Five Lands had to resurface that out of scheme budget. So what we got last year was about 4 million quid with no unsupported borrowing. This year we'll get at least what we got last year plus inflation, or if committee decides to go for the higher rate investment, we'll get just over £8 million.
Would this money be enough? Like same in Mackworth, we have payments. They are not walkable. They are like big, huge gaps. And the funny thing was that when I asked the highway inspector to go and survey, they said it was perfectly fine. But with this money coming in, is there any chance of getting these payments fixed?
Well, the key thing has to be that we have to take that asset management approach, because that asset management approach has been agreed through Cabinet and through committee. So that's for highways, for pavements, for everything, and that will be the same. So we will be able to do more because we have more money, but it's still that we have to have the robustness of that asset management approach, because that's what the Department of Transport expected when we got it delivered directly, and that's what they expect EMCA to make sure that we deliver. So if we can't demonstrate that we're doing that, you'll have seen the highways reports that came out this week, where we got amber, but green for innovation. So we're doing okay and that's about our asset management approach. Do we prioritise correctly? Do we understand our network?
So as a councillor, I've given 10 payments, for example. So highways will go out and then they will do their bits, and then we'll know which payments will get done.
There's a whole system of condition analysis that goes on. It's continual, it's non-stop. And what it does is it ranks carriageways, footways, etc., highway assets. This is a program. What's most in need of investment, i.e. where are we best spending money, and where are we best spending preventative money as well, so it doesn't get to the condition of absolute shockingness. So basically that priority comes out. What Bernie was saying is we used to get 2.35 million that used to get sliced out and topped up. We used to have a list that the asset management program would produce. I'll probably be able to do the top 20 schemes. Now we might be able to do the top 60.
Okay, right.
Sorry, Chair, just a very.
Please be
it's a
quick,
very bad
Mr.
point.
Darby.
With extra funding, it needs extra funding needs more resources.
Yeah.
So if we're saying 20 to 60, have we got the capacity to be able to deliver that internally, or would we be using contractors? Or
it'll be a mixed economy, which is the most popular route of doing it now. So the mixed economy, a mixture of internal and external. And we've shown in the past that we can upscale to spend higher volumes of money. We upscaled this year to deliver. If you take all of the scheme spend and the direct maintenance spend, looking at about £6 million. So going from anywhere between 4 to 8, we don't think is very stressful. Just for some reassurance, what we haven't done is just go to MCA and say, give us as much as possible, we can spend it all. We have to be realistic. We've got a finite capacity in terms of staffing and contracting. There's a commercial market that's got a finite capacity. It's not adjusted yet to the regional amount of funding. And the other thing is we've got a depot, and the depot's got a finite capacity as we know. So we've had to be realistic, but I think we've set it at a good level that's deliverable.
Cool. Right, moving on. Have we got anything else to say?
I think the main thing was just to highlight kind of the future funding priorities. So as we mentioned, we're moving from a bidding process into much more commissioning and investment pipeline development process, which is very much a two-way conversation between the city and MCA. And so we thought it would be helpful just to outline the areas that will be priorities for the future, and just to say this is something that will be coming through to Cabinet for decision shortly. So this is your opportunity really to help to understand what that is and to influence it. So I'll hand over to Catherine to just run through the regen stuff and then have a quick comment on.
Yeah, so in terms of the report, if you move to 4.12, that's where obviously the section of the report before that describes what Tammy's just said in terms of the move from bidding to programme. And we've set out here the emerging key priority areas that we think will form the basis of our programme approach with MCA for future funding. So the first one is city centre regeneration. We all know how important that is to the city, how important it has been for a number of years. And there's a number of specific schemes that have either had some initial funding, as we talked about earlier, and we will want to work with MCA on to continue developing and bringing forward in the future. And we've set out here the range of, because I suppose the other point to make here is whatever we bring forward has to align with MCA strategies. I know that's a really obvious point to make, but there will be certain things that we'd like to do in the city centre, but they just don't. Yeah. They simply don't fit with what MCA needs to achieve with through their plans in terms of outputs, outcomes, etc., and how they spend the money. But as Tammy says, we're in active conversation, and I suppose just to summarise, bringing forward office accommodation in the city centre is absolutely critical now, because we've done a lot of work in the last few years to bring forward, I guess, leisure, destination and transport schemes, but we still haven't cracked the nut, if you like, of grade A office accommodation. That still absolutely requires public sector intervention to get that off the ground. New homes is critical as well, and we've got a number of sites that we're provisionally targeting for major scale housing development, and that all links through to the local plan consultation as well, that's just been launched this week. Delivery of the HQ for Great British Railways is still obviously a key thing that we want to get over the line, and along with that, the opportunities that might bring more of the rail industry to Derby, and also more other wider benefits around skills and innovation. So that's another key priority. And then obviously promoting new uses for our high street and an enhanced cultural offer that increase that vibrancy. They're all themes we know about and we want to keep pushing on. And then finally, public realm. We've got a public realm strategy in development at the moment. We had public consultation on that at the weekend just gone, and we're bringing forward the strategy through to Cabinet in due course as well. And that's critical because public realm's almost the glue that holds all of these developments together. And back to the active travel conversation, public realm that encourages people, helps them to feel safe, helps them to feel welcome, helps them to navigate their way around the city, and makes it easier for them to travel using their feet or a cycle rather than parking at one end of the city and then getting in the car and driving to the other. That's the kind of thing that public realm will help us achieve. So that's all the city centre work. The investment zone we've touched on at Infinity Park, and this is really around building on what we already have at Infinity Park in the Nuclear Skills Academy and the prototyping centre that I referenced earlier, and making sure that we bring forward more technologies and more supporting infrastructure to help growth of green industries and manufacturing. That's really, really critical. And that's why Infinity Park is in the investment zone, because EMCA have said those are the sectors that they want to support. So that's really important. And economic growth, we've already talked about, business support, helping businesses to start, grow, innovate, and attract inward investment as well, continues to be important. And how we do that regionally alongside locally, something that we're in conversations with at the moment. Culture and the visitor economy, that's also a strong theme, because from Derby's perspective, we really see the opportunity here for EMCA to add value through bringing Derby's tourism offer into the mix and investing in it. That's where the real growth can be. We already know we've got a wonderfully strong offer in the Peak District, Chatsworth, etc. Derby, we also have a strong offer. What we were in Time Out this week as one of the top destinations to
Number 7
visit. So we really are on the map, but there's more we could do, and there's more growth that we could help EMCA achieve in the visitor economy. And then connectivity and infrastructure, that's exactly where it starts to kind of overlap with and connect in with the transport. So I'm just conscious of time. That's kind of a whiz through, but it's important, I think, for this board to understand where those key chunky themes are going to be and where our programme areas are going to be.
You're absolutely right what you just said there about the Peak District. Sir Richard Fitzherbert that said it's undiscovered. You know, it's undiscovered. People don't, they know it's there, but nobody goes. Very few. It's wonderful. You go up there and you see Chatsworth House and Tissington Hall, and these places are just amazing. And more people need to go, and we need to promote them. Right, okay.
Peak District is one of the highest visited tourist places in the UK.
Well, either way, we're still doing a lot more visitors up there.
It is.
To get there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point.
I'm sure Sir Richard would rather you stayed at Tissington, but right, where are we going now?
I will just sort of skip through this very quickly. But we also looked at emerging priorities. It's in 4.3 of the transport. And these are just broadish headlines, and some of this is still developing. You know, you can see from the committee papers, still development. There's a 2-stage process on funding. So there's the immediate funding decisions, which are going to be taken this week. These taken by committee recommendation to board, EMCA board. And then there's going to be a further process, because the evaluation of it is sort of, takes a while to wade through all of the schemes. I think it is worth repeating again, though, that this is very much us setting out an agenda and working with colleagues at EMCA to sort of co-produce a programme. It's not a bidding process, and of course the strategic aims are there all of the time in this. Transport, it shouldn't be treated necessarily as a separate subject. It is about its contribution to all of the other reasons EMCA exists, particularly around growth, jobs, access to skills, learning, etc. So it's not a sort of game on its own. When we're submitting what we're submitting and we're telling our story, we've got a link to housing, jobs, etc. So fundamentally, though, we're looking at the continuation of projects we started with CRSTS funding as it was in 2025-26. The reason for that, just very quickly, we had the blessing and the curse of TCF. We had the blessing that it was a good thing to have anyway, and a lot of money, and it was good for the city, and we were able to do some really good things with it. But it did drain us of anything that we'd got in any form of development in a cabinet somewhere or on a shelf. We're starting from a very low base where we burned through whatever we had for future years, got burned through on TCF. And we've had no specific future years funding like most local authorities since about 2011. So, you know, we're starting from a low base, if you like, where we've got a lot of things to develop. We've got some ideas, but most of them are a long way from delivery. However, we have tried to pick out some things that are deliverable. Certainly around the maintenance and the enhanced maintenance schemes, they're definitely deliverable. Johnny Mills Bridge, you know, work's been continuing on that. We will continue with that. The ESC to fund it into next year, and we put it in our priority list for immediate decision making because we need to keep that particularly rolling. It's a complicated project, if for no other reason than nobody owns it in the sense of ownership. It rests with Crown Estates, but tight. Integrated resilience and asset and safety, we've sort of talked about that in terms of road safety funding, particularly the road condition, pavement condition funding. Communities and neighbourhoods, we've talked about that. We are also trying to keep the speed up with OCAL, and particularly looking into the future of OCAL phase 3. Now, we're not suggesting that we're going to fund it or asking MCA to fund it. We need to fund the development work so that as we're getting through phase 2, phase 3 is being developed. If it's to it. Connectivity, health and green space, sort of touched on that and its relationship to the wall plans and the net gain type ideas. And the connectivity for growth sort of started out by talking about that. Just one other thing is that we said it's not bidding, it's very much co-development and allocations amongst the strategies and stuff. It is very different as well in a sense of historically we've had our funding from DFT. DFT have opened up a program, TCF for example, and they ask us to submit a business case and they assess it and then they give us a funding award, tell us how many years we've got to spend. This is completely different. This is an ongoing machine now where delivery, yeah, very important. Everybody wants to see delivery. It's really important that MPA shows what it can do. But at the same time, the pipeline activity needs to run in parallel. Pipeline planning must never stop, if you see what I mean, because you know it's always got to be catching up or trying to get ahead of the actual funding ask, because that's the routine we're into now. And if you look at other combined authorities and you know the resettlements and settlements beyond settlements and additional funding, that's how you get these 20-25 year chains of investment.
Okay. Any more for any more? Are we done? No, we're done. Excellent. Any questions? I think we've asked them all to go. Okay. If there's no further, I'll bring that item to a close. You're welcome to leave should you so wish. Right, this brings on to the last item, the work programme. Jack, what have you got to tell us?
Just say that the council cabinet member for climate change is due to come to the next meeting following a request from the last meeting. The other thing is to say, please draw on the information from today and thinking about what items you'd like to come forward in the future. So you've been given some really important information on priorities, and that should bear in mind when you're thinking about topics.
Lovely. In which case, thank you. I think we don't need to say anything else. Well, thank you all very much indeed. And the next meeting is Tuesday, the 3rd of March. Have a lovely evening.